on the product side of the world at companies like Yahoo and HP, and some of the ones that are now almost, we think of them nostalgically because they're from a different era. And then most of my marketing and growth and go-to-market leadership journey has been at AI startups for the last 8 years. I focus a lot, not just helping grow startups or turn around startups the way I've done with Aviso and with TAC prior to that, but also helping out entrepreneurs and investors where I can.
Welcome to How to Grow Using AI, Machine Learning, and Intelligent Automation, a podcast by eClerks. We explore how AI and machine learning are being used to scale businesses from end to end. But that's not all. In each episode, our industry experts dive deep into topics like AI-enabled sales optimization, predictive analytics, AI-powered marketing, and machine learning for product personalization. I promise to give you the goods, the insights, and the strategies that you need to grow your business. I'm your host, Nicholas Cole. Today I have joining me Amit Pande. He has served as the Chief Marketing Officer at Aviso. He has worked with some of the biggest and most respected companies out there, such as HP, Yahoo, Oracle. He is also an AI investor. This guy, he has been in some of the biggest and most respected boardrooms, such as Forbes, Stanford University. So in a nutshell, we have somebody today who definitely knows what he's talking about. And so before we get into our conversation today, Amir, why don't you let us know just a little bit more about yourself?
Nicholas, it's a pleasure to be here, and good morning to everyone that's listening in. I'll just point out that I think about a lot of what you shared about my background and career as a series of journeys. And so for me, there's really been one consistent journey throughout this period, which is the journey of different technologies. And I came into it from studying human-computer interaction back at the University of Minnesota 20 years ago, with the idea that the magic happens at the intersections of humans, technology, and sort of social needs. So that's the common thread in the journey. But more specifically, half of the journey was definitely, as you mentioned, on the product side of the world at companies like Yahoo and HP, and some of the ones that are now almost, we think of them nostalgically because they're from a different era. And then most of my marketing and growth and go-to-market leadership journey has been at AI startups for the last 8 years. I focus a lot, not just helping grow startups or turn around startups the way I've done with Aviso and with TAC prior to that, but also helping out entrepreneurs and investors where I can. I live here in Pleasanton, California, and I think it would be fair to sort of describe me as someone that has a reasonably optimistic view of where we're headed with AI and our human experience.
So you mentioned the journey. And so definitely over the past year and a half or so, tech industry has been on a journey. And so today, as we begin, we want to talk about AI augmentation for sales, marketing, and customer service. Can you let us know a little bit about what is AI augmentation and how can that be beneficial to sales, marketing, and customer success?
Absolutely, Nicholas. This is some work from a frameworks perspective, the idea of thinking about AI as both automating things that we want to do less of or that we don't want to really do at all, versus AI augmentation, which is the idea of having AI help us alongside in various forms. This is not a new framework. I think folks like Gartner and McKinsey and a lot of research out in the field has identified this augmentation automation framework as a simple but useful one to think about all those things that we don't want to see done by AI on the automation side, things that sort of become invisible to us. Augmentation is really interesting because this is where you start thinking about the relationship between AI and professional work areas such as customer support and marketing and customer success and sales, essentially all those things that you would typically put under that umbrella that is these days being called GTM or go-to-market. I'll start with a couple of high-level examples of thinking about this across these functions, and perhaps we can then go broader or deeper. Let's start with customer support. I think this is one of those areas that everybody knows is important for a business, but the people that experience customer support and the people that offer customer support, often if you ask them about the technologies involved, they often say that, most of them suck, right? Most of them don't necessarily live up to the expectation of what they were sold as. And so here, an example of AI augmentation would be to think about where you have a support agent And when that support agent is at that point of runtime, where there's a customer on the other side and, they're really upset about their United ticket, their Apple Vision Pro, or, maybe they have an expensive turbine equipment and things not working as sold. And they're trying to figure out how to best serve this customer. There is a lot of ways in which AI can augment you with past history, recommended actions, or even sort of benefiting from the collective wisdom of similar cases that may have been addressed in the past. Now, this is a simple example of AI augmentation, but it's very powerful in the context of how, in that very intense interaction in customer support, where people often call when they're not happy about something. I wish more people would call when they're happy about something, right? But people usually call when they're not happy about something. You can help the customer service representative be more augmented with AI in their work. But now let's flip it to the other side. You think about you or me or one of the companies we've worked with or work with as a customer, and we're calling. Now imagine if we also have the benefit of the same augmentation, but in a slightly different way. So let's say you spent like 45 minutes with this person on a call and a bunch of things were discussed. If you could get a summary of everything that was discussed, then that's going to be as a follow up, automatically sent to you as an email. You don't have the burden of having a notebook to remember who you spoke with. And in customer support, you probably had this experience where someone says, do you have a pen and paper next to you? Can you just write down this 11-digit code? And then you write it down in one of these diaries, and then you don't ever remember where you wrote it. These are simple use cases of augmentation that can help both sides of the marketplace. But if you abstract this out and you think about the other functions in go to market, you could extend a lot of the same logic and say, how do I help the person that's serving and the person that's being served? And at the end of the day, for any organization, there's always somebody who's serving somebody to make it go forward. One last thing about AI augmentation as we build upon this. One of the reasons I like the metaphor, and I think you'll relate to this as someone who's done a lot of writing in journalism, is that it's a more collaborative view of the future where our roles as humans at work change and become better with AI versus, the idea that AI should take away a lot of the jobs that people do. And I think if we think of augmentation in the way it's happening with co-pilots today, such as Microsoft Copilot or the co-pilots, I think it's an interesting way of saying that these AIs can really help everyone in their job by taking some parts of the job and just making that better a little bit and then a lot more over the rest of this decade.
So you mentioned relationship when you began. And so when we talk about AI augmentation for sales, marketing, and customer service, does this help organizations better understand their customers?
Absolutely. One of the most interesting things about customer listening and customer understanding is that there are companies like Amazon, which have this sort of ingrained in their principles and up on a wall somewhere, right? That I think Jeff Bezos famously called it once the divine discontent of customers. And he said, it's that thing that keeps powering us. You talk to any company out there and you say, do you care about your customers? And they'll say, what kind of question is that? Of course I care about my customers. And I absolutely care about my employees too. But you and I both know, we've, been around the block and we've seen our own, white hair. And we kind of know that most companies, either they actually don't care at all, and they're just saying the right things, they're doing sloganeering, or they actually do care, but they just don't know how to do it, and they struggle. So I think going to your question about how can AI help in this era of helping listen to customers better, absolutely it can. The question becomes, where and how. So I'll offer a few examples of this, right? I think the first is that historically data collection of customer needs or customer sentiment or customer experience within existing product or services was relegated to a lot of biased mechanisms. Your surveys by themselves are powerful, but surveys can also get biased because you don't talk to enough people or you only ask the questions you want to ask. And then the way that survey data is consumed in an organization, often it gets buried in PowerPoint slides that nobody reads, right? You also then have this power law problem, which is that there's a few individuals that are sort of given the keys to the kingdom in terms of you're the customer researcher or you're the salesperson and you're the product manager. You go out and listen to what customers are saying. So you almost say, well, you're being tasked to do this, but everyone else, do your thing. Whereas the reality is that as an organization, everyone should be listening to customers and everyone should be listening to everything that customers have to say, past, present, and future. One practical way in which AI can help is that all of these calls that are being recorded today that customers have with your success or support engineers, or that prospects have with your sales team, or that your partners are having with you, all of these interviews that are being conducted, even with future employees who are also your customers in some way or the other, all of this can go into central, you think of them as data banks or databases, but just using that and looking for sentiment and understanding what is happening. This is already happening in some pockets, Nicholas, but just think about this happening at scale. It allows an organization to actually listen to their customers a lot better. And, I think this is where, I'll say that the idea of benefiting from the collective wisdom of what has been heard before could be really helpful. Recently I was talking to a very senior leader at a company called Qualtrics, which is out of Utah. And, they're one of the biggest surveying platforms. And he made this really interesting comment that anybody who has the ability to use ChatGPT can now build a conversational survey tool. You can ask a question in a chat-like interface and, a customer can answer it. And he said there's a lot of companies which are coming up and saying, oh, this is going to help you listen to your customers better. But he made an interesting comment where he said that, look, you can ask the question in an easier way, but at the end of the day, what you want to know from your answers is how well do your answers compare to the best answers of the millions of companies that have asked the same question before. And the example he offered was, he said, when you ask people that are in a team setting, let's say, if they're doing a cookout together, okay, you do a team bonding activity and you now survey all the people after that and you say, hey, how was the food? And people say, oh, the food was good. And then you ask them, and you study what factors correlate the most with why the food is better. He said that we've done millions of these surveys, and the found is it's the sense of contribution that the team members have that they were all cooking together. It's crazy. It wasn't the quality of the ingredients. It wasn't, the wine that went with the food. It was actually that people. So his point was you can sample your customers, but see if you can compare whatever you're learning to the best in class. And the only other thing I'd add to that, Plus, is that, whatever we do with existing customers in terms of that, listening to those customers through, these calls and all these other mechanisms, calls, what's happening in calls, what's happening on emails, what's happening on your digital properties. One thing that companies can do better today is also make it easy for the customers that they serve to be able to give them feedback in a better way. And, as someone who's probably driven or participated in a lot of town halls, the only counterintuitive point I'll mention is as much as generative AI and AI-based tools are going to be helpful for us, there's actually no substitute to sometimes bringing 100 people that you serve in a room, in a town hall setting and saying, well, what does everybody think? How's everybody doing? Versus, hey, what do you think about my product? Because your product is just something that people use to get a job done. They don't wake up in the morning and say, I'm going to use, Zendesk or Salesforce or whatever, right? They don't, they wake up and say, I got to take care of my family. I got to go to work. And so I think that there's no substitute to good old school bringing people together for customer listening as well.
Yeah, I like when you first started, you mentioned Amazon, you mentioned some of the principles. So what you're talking about, what you were referring to, the leadership principles that they have, and it's called customer obsession. And so when we talk about improving customer service for sales marketing through AI augmentation, what are some of the challenges that an organization may face AI augmentation for sales marketing and customer success?
This is a great question, Nicholas. Often the challenges are not just technological, right? I think technological challenges are real. They're quite real. But I think there's a second or the third level of challenges. The first level of challenge is always that of mindset and behaviors and having a clear idea of where you're going. In larger public companies, I think they've had a longer history of having gone through succession changes and surviving over a long period of time. The companies that you and I grew up appreciating when we were children that are still alive today, they're totally different companies, right? And so I think the interesting thing is that a Nike or a turbine company like GE, these companies, the ones that survived at least, right, they've had to reinvent themselves. And I think these companies have a better acknowledgement that, hey, change management takes time and we got to get everybody in the team together and let's start small, create some pockets of success and then replicate that success across the organization. This is something that sounds easy in theory, but it's really difficult. As I would say, the first barrier and obstacle is really just that most companies, they don't have the before we talk about skill, you got to talk about will. They just don't have the will to do it. So they'll just make that mistake, especially if they're smaller companies or mid-sized companies where they're not doing it for the right reasons. They're not asking, is it really valuable for me or my customers? And they're just copying some other company's behaviors. But I would also say that if you can go beyond that mindset and say, look, I think we have a pretty good true north that we're going towards. We know what that true north is. And that could be something as specific as, hey, our net promoter score sucks. I'll give you an example. You remember that exercise bike Peloton? Peloton has been up and down, and I don't know if people like it as much as they did during the pandemic because it was more useful in the pandemic. But Pelotons historically, or this new kind of idea of having something in your home that is also connected to an immersive group experience you can have, they usually have a net promoter score of like 60, 70, 80. It's pretty high as compared to, say, gyms. Most gyms have a really low net promoter score for, it's not that the gyms are bad. It's more like, you end up overpaying or you pay and then you never use them. And so you might say, look, our goal is we got to have a net promoter score in our industry that's like Airbnb, so we got to get to like the high percentiles, 80 and 90. And now you have the true north, and then you align your organization and say, that's where we're going. We're going to get there in 2 years. That makes it easy to overcome some of the obstacles. But then the second thing that gets in the way is older processes. One of the challenges with software historically is that we took something that was inefficient and we added a piece of software on top. And we made that inefficient process inefficient with software, right? So you think of a classic example, which is not, it's sales and customer support related, but in a different context. Think of the process of how companies help candidates find jobs and the way candidates themselves find jobs with companies. You talk to anybody out there in the field and they'll basically say, yeah, the process is completely broken. It's just completely broken, right? You have people who are sort of blindly sending their resumes into a system. And then the people who are on the other side, who are recruiters, are like, oh my God, I'm just getting buried because I don't even know what to look at. Now, this is after software. So what happened? You took an inefficient process, which is that you use those old models of, resumes, which you and I both know resume barely captures anything about a person. Even LinkedIn captured very little about a person. And you just added more software to it. So where I was going with that is that oftentimes the biggest obstacle in this era to bringing new technologies in is that your house just has too much junk and you overpaid for that junk. And you replace the word house with company and you replace the word junk with software. The gentleman who heads Vista Equity Partners, one of the largest private equity companies in the world, he has this amazing quote where he says that at some point all software tastes like chicken. And, he doesn't mean it in a bad way, but he just says that every software company thinks that they're whatever your premium cut of whatever you like eating, but actually all tastes like chicken. This is a real obstacle because you spend so much on those things that until you clean house, you can't bring new things in. The third obstacle is actually technological, which is, that your data is usually really bad and unclean, and you're in the middle of some massive migration project. So when you're in the middle of a migration project, you are, it's not a migration from one home to another that you and I might do in a week, right? It's a 1-year process. So people say, well, we just can't talk to anyone right now. There's also this genuine problem that you have to identify the right use cases to begin with. If you look at the data around AI right now, around the adoption in the enterprise, you'll find that it's still at sort of level 1. Companies have gotten to the pilot stage of projects. So a lot of companies will say, oh yeah, we've got a pilot going on. But taking that pilot across the organization is a really hard challenge for both companies and the vendors that serve them. And there's a lot of things that can happen along the way where that pilot or that proof of concept just sort of fades out. So, I would definitely encourage companies that are looking to bring AI into their organizations or the vendors that are selling to them to think about the people obstacles and the process and incumbency obstacles, like whatever's in there, in a sense, before they even talk about just the technological obstacles, because it'll just ensure that once you get in, you can stay there for a while and you can help the company grow. Every company that doesn't do a good job of this makes it harder for the next company. Because then, if you're a big company and you ask your friends at another big company and say, hey, how did that AI project go? And they say, oh, we did a bunch of things, but I don't know what we got out of it. So we've kind of canned it. But then it dents your confidence. And so maybe one thing I'll leave you with on this, Nicholas, is that if you look at how cars have become safer over time, even electric cars, which was a newer industry at some point, and now it's kind of across the world, there are standards. There are safety standards for cars. There are safety standards for many other things in our life, including when you buy a bottle of water, and you have safety that means that you're able to use these products in a comfortable way. Companies have to do more of this in the age of AI to make the buyer feel comfortable that what they're buying, they can also manage the liability in an interesting way. Because if you used AI and it offered a decision to a customer, and then the customer said, well, but your AI told me to do this and it was maybe not the right decision, then who's liable? Is it one of the platform companies that provide all these tools, like the ones we spoke about, the underlying companies, or is it the companies on top of it? The answer is that, we're talking about an edge case. We're not talking about the majority of things. Most of the time, we're not talking about life and death situations. But I just think that the more we get some standardized frameworks around this, I think it'll help everybody.
So you mentioned the age of AI and standardized frameworks. And so when we think about all of that, there are different aspects of AI. We've already spoke about AI augmentation. Then you have multimodal AI. Then you also have generative AI, kind of the buzzword of the past year. So can you give us an idea just on a surface level? What are some of the differences or commonly things that are common within AI augmentation, multimodal AI, and generative AI?
I think one way to think about this is that in this journey towards better and better artificial intelligence, which then starts getting into what people often refer to as artificial general intelligence, or AGI, and then they start talking about the level beyond that, which is where AI is considerably more intelligent than humans, or artificial super intelligence. This is a very long journey and spectrum. This journey actually started in the 60s and 70s. It's not a new journey. There was a massive excitement and hype cycle in sort of the decade that many of us were born in those 2 decades, and then the hype went the other direction because it was too early. But the idea of thinking machines kind of goes back to MIT and a lot of the work that was done in the post World War II era, a lot of it in America, a lot of it in England at the time. And then you have this nuclear winter for a couple of decades where not much happens. And so one of the ways to think about all these terms like computer vision, generative AI, natural language processing, and such is that in that journey towards good AI to great AI to AGI and beyond, and in this journey of AI, which started from like the 60s, 70s, and then really picked up momentum in the new century. It really picked up, after Google did a bunch of really interesting work in the early 2000s. We are applying different disciplines of AI and different specializations of AI to solve very specific problems, right? And that's where a lot of these terms come in, and then they build up towards more hybrid terms. So, for example, the idea that computers can see the way humans can see, and they can actually see better than what humans can see. I mean, you and I can see each other, but we can't see the entire spectrum of colors. We can only see the visible human spectrum, right? But computers can see much better. Now, this is a journey that in the last 10 years got perfected a lot more because of self-driving cars and because of the way large-scale cameras we used, for example, for you're getting, a big game just happened over the weekend, right? You're getting like billions of people in, and you don't have enough staffing to manage every point. So you do these cameras which anonymize large crowd behaviors. We've been using cameras in the real world for decades, and then we started using cameras in cars. In the last 10 years, we started using cameras in self-driving cars. The problem they were trying to solve is, can I recognize objects with exactness and then take behaviors accordingly? And so computer vision has now a 10-year history of how this has happened. Natural language processing is similar, right? The idea that you're trying to understand human speech. The flip side of that, it's an old computer science term, it's the idea of natural language generation, that, something can understand what I do, and then it can kind of speak back to me. Now, this idea is not new, right? If you go back to even the customer support example we discussed, a very rudimentary version of it was playing out, right? You call this number and you say, well, what's the status of my ticket? And the phone speaks back at you. You're using more primitive versions of this. So that's natural language processing. Now, when Amazon Alexa and Microsoft's then technology called Cortana and Google Home came out 7, 8 years ago. Two startups ago, the startup I was working with, we were building a voice assistant for the sales function, with AI to help salespeople just kind of walk out of a meeting and just speak into the phone, and then it captured sort of your data behind the scenes. It was way ahead of its time, but and we were funded by Microsoft and Salesforce and all these guys. But the idea was that you can use a lot of the same things that an Amazon Alexa does and apply it in business in the context. So that's where NLP came in. Now, generative AI, you can think of it as the newest Lego block in the last 5 years that got added to this successive series of Lego blocks that were already being added. I should not forget to mention Google in this context, because if you go back to image processing, maybe 15, 18 years ago, when people spoke about, oh, wait, it can look at a million cats and know what's a cat and what's not. Remember that old project with ImageNet? That's where really the AI community really woke up, because image processing, which is now considered like oh, it's already done, was a really hard problem. And then a lot of folks at Google and Stanford and other places, they solved that problem. The reason I reference Google is because if you go from ImageNet to Transformers, which was that iconic paper in 2017 that was published, it was called Attention is All You Need. It was a new kind of architecture around Transformers, which is the bedrock of a lot of generative AI work. It really kicked off the last 5 years. The Chat GPT moment, which was about 14 months ago, that moment was really now this technology of transformers and the idea that you can not only understand, but generate human like sentences. And you can generate those based on an entire body of knowledge that you've captured from the internet over time. That is the newest block. So one way to think about where we are headed, with more hybrid or multimodal approaches of AI is that you're combining many of these different modes of AI, a lot of these different disciplines in creative ways and applying them to solve different problems. A good example is in a factory. So in a factory, if you've got, let's say, a human person, a human operator, and you have an AI powered robot, let's say, that are sort of both in the same factory, and you're sampling thousands of cars that are going by, you're using vision. And then let's say if there's a car that has a defect, and now the robot speaks it out, and the human's like, okay, I'm going to take a look at this because, you need human expertise. Now NLP is being applied. Now, if at the same time an email is sent out, with that information on, out of these cars, this car, something weird's happened in this car and we're fixing it, and an email automatically gets generated and gets sent out into your system, that's generative AI at work. So you start putting all these things together in terms of the different ways we interact with these AI systems, with different kinds of data using different AI disciplines. That's where the next many years are going to be really interesting.
Obviously, there's a lot of technology out there, and obviously, there's a lot more technology. New technology is being developed as we speak. And so, with that said, in the world of technology, I just want to ask you a question I've been thinking about this whole time, just wondering to myself. In the world of technology, if you had an opportunity, who would you most like to take to lunch?
This is a great question, Nicholas, because, when you think about where we are with 2024 and ChatGPT arrived in 2021, the year of 2021, actually the year of 2022, sorry. So it's only been a little over a year. Some of this evolution was predicted a long time ago. And I'm not talking Nostradamus, and, I'm not going that far. But there's a famous futurist out in the East Coast, whose name is Ray Kurzweil. Kurzweil. Ray Kurzweil is probably in its late 70s now. He predicted, I forget if he wrote this book in the late 90s or if he wrote it in the early 2000s, but he basically predicted that, he said, look, by 2030, we're probably going to get some forms of artificial general intelligence. And then by 2040, I think this is what's going to happen. What he predicted then, and he's most known for the term singularity that you've heard as well, the idea that, oops, looks like things are more intelligent than humans now across the board. He wrote about this stuff like 25 years ago. I'd love to, get a coffee with him or lunch and be like, well, you were very ahead of your time. And you were just accurate in saying that if the data increases and the compute increases, we're going to start seeing this level of intelligence emerge. Well, one, what's been different? Because you saw it play out. You were generally right, but like some things were different. And two, well, what do you think is going to happen now? Because now you have this benefit of the last 25 years. So I'd love to have a 15-minute conversation with Ray Kurzweil about this topic. And as given the background you have, Nicholas, I think you'll relate to this it is incredibly important for us to have a better sense of our history as humans and as technology consuming humans, and also listening to some of the people that have written about these histories to have a more informed set of views about the future, because it's really a set of probabilities playing out, right? It's not one future that's already decided.
You're definitely right. I would love to be a fly on the wall if you ever get that lunch. And so don't forget my email and some contact information. So just send me an invite if you happen to get an invite to that. And so, Amit, it has been wonderful having you on today. You provided some amazing insights. You gave us a lot of things to think about. You gave us some amazing ideas, more to things some organizations can be doing right at this very moment. And so it has been a pure pleasure. And so to our listeners, please tune in to our next episode.
Thank you so much, Nicholas. It's been a pleasure.
How to Grow Using AI, Machine Learning, and Intelligent Automation is brought to you by eClerx. For more information about services and how we can help your business leverage the power of AI and machine learning, visit our website at www.eclerx.com. That's www.eclerx.com. Don't forget to search for How to Grow Using AI, Machine Learning, and Intelligent Automation on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, or your favorite podcast platform. And make sure to subscribe so you don't miss any of our episodes. On behalf of everyone here at eClerx, thanks for listening.